Hello,
Hi,
I'm Nurse Thompson. I'm one of the nurses in this emergency department. What may I call you, please?
you can call me Jones.
Okay, Jones. I can
Yes.
see you are here with your son. What's his name?
His name is Joshua.
Okay, how
Yes.
old is Joshua?
Joshua is just 8 years old.
Okay.
Yes.
What brought you to the hospital today?
Well, this morning Joshua was playing in the garden, and then all of a sudden he came running with his face all swollen, saying that he's in severe pains, okay, because he got stung by a bee, and he's been restless ever since.
Oh, I see. I can see that this must have been very distressing for you. I'm so sorry that this happened to Joshua, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. So I want to examine Joshua. Is that okay with you?
Okay, please do.
Okay. From what I can see, Joshua's face is swollen and the face appears reddish. Okay. So we are going to admit Joshua in the ward to observe Joshua and see how Joshua will do because this condition is actually very manageable. Okay.
Are you sure Joshua is going to be okay with admission just in the ward and just for observation?
Mr. Jones, I can see that you are really worried about Joshua, and I really commend you because it shows you are concerned about your son. We will do all our best to make sure that Joshua will be okay. I can assure you that, all right?
Can't you admit Joshua in the intensive care unit? I would like Joshua to be where he's going to get maximum attention. I'm really worried about his condition.
It's all right, Mr. Jones, but ICU admission is not, it's meant for patients that are really unstable. And from the assessment, I can see that Joshua is not in any respiratory distress and his vital signs are all normal. Therefore, Joshua will not benefit from ICU admission. Are you with me, Jones?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay. Is there any other thing bothering you?
Yes, sure, I have some concerns.
Okay, what are these
Yes.
concerns, please?
Will Joshua develop meningitis from this bee sting?
Meningitis? Not at all, Mr. Jones. Meningitis is not caused by bee, is another different type of disease altogether. I can assure you that Joshua will not get meningitis from bee sting, okay?
Okay.
Do you still have any other thing you want us to discuss?
Yes. There's
Okay,
this boy that got stung by a bee in my neighborhood 2 weeks ago,
okay.
and he turned out to be blind later on.
Hmm. I'm so sorry that this happened to a child in your neighborhood, Jones. But from medical point of view, bee sting don't cause blindness. Something else would have caused that, and I can assure you that you did very well to have brought Joshua on time to the hospital. You did a great job. Well done. We would do everything possible to make sure that Joshua will not have such any complications. Okay?
Okay.
Is there any other thing you want to still tell me?
Yes, I want to find out, is Joshua going to develop difficulty in breathing? Because I also learned that people that get stung by bees actually develop difficulty in breathing.
Well, Jones, your concerns are really valid and they are right. The truth is this, when people are stung by bees, some persons might develop complications such as what you've mentioned. They might start having difficulty to breathe. But in Joshua's case, I've observed him and his vitals are stable and he's not having any respiratory problems. So it's not likely that your son will develop difficulty with breathing, okay?
Okay.
And we are going to admit him, and very soon the doctor will be here to review him and decide the best treatment for your son.
Okay.
Do you think that's something we can do together?
Definitely.
Okay, I'm really glad you came here, Mr. Jones. I don't know, is there any other thing you might still want us to talk about?
Nothing else for now. I'm really, really grateful. You've been very helpful.
Fantastic. I'm glad you are okay with our management plan, Mr. Jones. So we'll go right away and start the treatment, okay?
Okay.
I can assure you we'll do everything possible to make sure that your son is okay.
All right. I appreciate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's analyze this candidate's presentation. We are going to use the OET assessment criteria. We have the linguistic criteria and the clinical criteria. Let's start from the linguistic criteria. From the linguistic criteria, if you look at this candidate, the candidate was really very fluent, although there were some hesitations and some repetitions occasionally, but the candidate was really fluent. For native speakers, they occasionally hesitate. It's a normal thing when you are speaking English to like hesitate, do things like it's acceptable. But when the hesitations becomes too much, that's when it has a negative impact on your speaking. So for this candidate, he really did well. He was really very fluent. So let's look at the second criteria, intelligibility. When we talk about intelligibility, we want to know how did this candidate pronounce each word? Where did the candidate pronounce these words very clearly? For this candidate, he tried to some extent to pronounce most of his words very clearly, and he did a pretty good job in that aspect. Then another criteria that they use is what you call appropriateness of language. This candidate try as much as possible to use terms that the interlocutor will understand, that the patient will understand. Although occasionally this candidate used some difficult words. For example, when this candidate said respiratory distress, to some extent, not that respiratory distress is such a big word, but for this patient, this expression is not too appropriate. The candidate would have said something like this: difficulty with breathing or respiratory problems. That would have been better to use. But overall, in terms of appropriateness of language, most of the terms that the candidate used were medically inclined, and they were layman's word that the patient could easily understand. Now, when we look at resource of grammar and expression, both the idiomatic expressions and vocabularies and tenses of this patient, they were all on point. So the candidate really did a great job in this aspect. Now, when we come to the clinical criteria, we talk about relationship building. When you are discussing with a patient, trying to know what is wrong with a patient, you are expected to build a relationship with that patient from the beginning of the discussion to the end of that discussion. For instance, this candidate said, hello. He first of all greeted this patient, and this patient replied. Then he introduced himself so that he can establish a relationship with the patient and then try to also know the patient's name. Okay, in this case, the patient's name, the patient said, please call me Jones. Okay, and this candidate tried as much as possible to occasionally call this patient's name during the conversation. Occasionally we hear the candidate say, Jones, could you please, Jones, I can see that you are Jones. Occasionally the candidate was calling this patient's name, but this candidate also made an error here because the patient said, call me Jones. Occasionally you could hear the candidate calling this patient Mr. Jones, which is very wrong. The patient has already said, call me Jones. So there's no need calling this patient Mr. Jones. Okay. Now, for understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective, the, the presenter tried as much as possible to empathize with this patient. There is this something that this candidate did that was really, really very nice. This candidate also tried to praise this patient, telling the patient, it's good that you came with your son to the hospital. You've done a good job. Well done. This is expected of you to do to patient. And these things, they help to make your score to be very high. But when you don't incorporate all these criteria, you might come out having low scores like 350, 340, 330, and thereabouts. But if you incorporate all these criteria, you shouldn't score anything less than 400 in speaking. It's actually very easy to get above 400 in OET speaking. So this candidate tried as much as possible to empathize with the patient, Occasionally, you could hear the candidate say, "I'm sorry to hear this. I'm sorry. I can see that this must have been very distressing for you." He used a lot of empathic words to make this patient to feel comfortable. And at the end, you could see that this patient was really, really okay with the with the nurse's treatment. Okay, so the next criteria that they use is providing structure. Now, you can see how this candidate progressed. He started by asking this patient what really happened. This patient said the interlocutor said what happened, and he tried to like examine this examine the son, and then said his examination findings, and from there he progressed to admitting this patient and offering treatment. So he didn't immediately start from who will treat and before asking about what really happened. So you should try as much as possible to make your presentation very, very natural. The more natural your presentation is, the better score you will get. But if you make your presentation as if you are writing an exam, you are very anxious, you are trying to ask just to follow the task the way they are, not following as in reading them the way they are, instead of adding some flesh and making it more natural, you will see you will score a very low point. Then another thing that this nurse did very well. This nurse tried as much as possible to gather information. Occasionally, he will also ask this, do you still have any other thing bothering you? Are there things that you still want us to discuss? The nurse really did a very, very excellent job in this aspect. And that's one thing I would like you to incorporate in your speaking. Don't just talk and stop. After saying the first point, discussing the first point, ask this interlocutor, are there other things that you still want us to discuss? Are there other things still bothering you? Do you still want to tell me more about this problem? Okay. Do you still have any question to ask? These are some of the expressions that you can use to probe this patient and see something come out of this patient. And sometimes in gathering in your information, even when the interlocutor would have told you what is wrong or say something, you can just try to repeat what the interlocutor said. Okay, for me to get you clearly, you said that your son was beat by a bee. Am I correct? Not that you didn't hear the interlocutor initially, you actually did, but you are trying to to make your information gathering very more interesting, and also establish a relationship between these patients too, okay? And also try to make the patients know that you are actually listening to him. So these are the things that we incorporate. And the last thing is how you give the information. The information given is very important. Don't start using big vocabulary for this patient, using big words for this patient. No, try as much as possible. Use the words that that a layman can easily understand. And when giving your information, even when the patient is angry, try to bring down your tone while talking to this patient. Try as much as possible. Make your discussion very, very natural. You can still replay this presentation to understand more. Thank you, guys. I think this candidate actually did a pretty good job. Well done. As you are preparing, I wish you the very best, and I will encourage you to like my video. I will encourage you to like my video. You can hit the subscribe button below. Anytime I release any video, you will be the first to be notified. You can also share this video to other candidates preparing for this examination. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me via this contact. Thank you very much, and do have a blessed day. Bye.